Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar on exploring Sage 300 Payroll. All lines are currently on mute, and if you have any questions, please use the chat box, and we will address them during the presentation. We will also have a Q&A period at the end for any additional questions. With that in mind, I'd like to introduce Anna, who will be presenting today.
Hello, my name is Anna McNally. Today we are going to review Sage Canadian Payroll. My role with BAASS is I'm the payroll practice lead. I'm also a Sage consultant with 20 years of experience. And for our agenda today, we're going to focus on these 4 points. Improve payroll costs, how having Sage 300 Payroll can improve your payroll costs, having graded control over your payroll, improve accessibility, and reporting. The payroll cycle really starts from recruiting. After an employee is recruited and they are set up, onboarded, then they go to payroll and payroll sets them up. So today, we aren't going to go through the full cycle of an employee from recruiting to retirement. We're going to focus on payroll. So on our first agenda item, it's about costs. The costs that you can save bringing payroll in-house. We do have an ROI that I could share with everybody on today's call that you can fill out information about how many employees you have. Up at the top here, it shows us the employees that we have in this particular sample is 200. So the top component is if you have payroll outsourced, and the bottom component would be if you're using Sage Canadian Payroll. So if we just take a couple minutes to look at what the slide shows, the comparative, most of the comparative you'll see here is time, or sorry, is dollars, but time also factors in as dollars, and we will look at that on the next slide. But at the top, it's saying over a space of 5 years for us outsourcing our payroll to an outsourced payroll provider. For the first year, if we have 200 employees and we have 26 pays. And then here's the breakdowns of the services that we typically get or typically receive with an outsourced payroll. And that would be costs for either doing physical check or for EFTs, generating our ROEs, setting up new hires, doing our T4s, different types of reporting and miscellaneous. So some companies, if they have 200 employees, could be faced with a cost of $23,000 per year to generate their pay and to provide those services. If you were looking at a solution of Sage 300 to bring that in-house, Sage Canadian Payroll, also with 200 employees. This is just a high-level breakdown of what the first year's cost would be. Keep in mind, these are just guesstimates. They're not actual facts, but they are fairly close that if you wanted to ask me today, Anna, what would it cost in order for us to do this for 200 employees? This is what you would be looking at a cost. So 200 employees, you'd be looking at purchasing the Sage module. You'd be looking at licensing it for either 1 or 2 payroll individuals. Our implementation costs, which are a one-time cost, and then any maintenance going forward, which would be your annual software assurance, which you currently have with your current Sage application if you're using Sage 300. And then lastly would be our EFT charges. So the EFT charges down here actually match the EFT charges that we put up here. We're assuming it's 15 cents per charge, but that could be changed. So if you look at a 5-year scope of how much money an organization with 200 employees, 26 or to 27 pays in a year, you're looking at an investment of $123,000 with outsourced payroll. In-house payroll, there's still, of course, a cost associated with it. And the cost for the software and to have payroll in-house, we're looking at an investment of $46,000 over a period of 5 years. So that's $76,000 in savings that an organization can benefit from. Those of you who are interested in receiving this ROI to do yourselves, just put that in the chat box, and at the end of the session, we will email that to you. And you can put in your own numbers to get your information. This next slide is just further information of the cost savings. It's more of a visual on how much that you can currently save. So having external versus an internal, the savings is around $75,000 for 200 employees. So inside of Sage 300 Canadian Payroll, this is the complete payroll cycle from the very beginning of the cycle to the very end. So pretty standard, nothing different here than what you would probably do in your existing system or your outsourced. So step one is you add, you modify your employees prior to doing your pay. If you're outsourcing it, you more than likely are still responsible to set up the employees or send that information to your provider in order for them to set them up. However, if you do have your payroll in-house, you have accessibility to add, modify, and changes at any time. There is no restrictions because it's part of your accounting software. The next step would be to add, modify, or import your time cards. So if you have salaried staff, you don't have to have a time card. You know that they have a standard amount of default hours they work per period. But if you do have hourly staff, or if you have part-timers and you're capturing their information, you can either set up their time cards. Time cards could be set up to be reusable or a one of, and you can also import your time cards. So these 2 points here, if you have HR or if you have a time and attendance application, this information can be shared between those applications in Sage 300 Payroll. So any callers on the call who have HRMS, we could link it to the Canadian Payroll so that you set up your employees in one spot and that information gets transitioned into Canadian Payroll. So once the employees' time cards are in, we calculate the pay. And this is where really we bring all the information together so that we can then review and print a report to verify that the information is correct. You can calculate this twice a week. You can calculate it every day. You can calculate it every 2 weeks. There is no limitation of how often you can run your calculate pay. And when I say that you can calculate it twice a week, I mean that if you have a brand new employee or an employee that you want to make changes to and you want to know what the impact of those changes are, you can run an ad hoc payroll to verify what that information or what that outlook is going to have, what that outlook is going to be without it impacting your actual payroll. So once the calculate payroll is completed and we review what's called our pre-check register, we can at any point go back to any one of these prior steps and rerun those steps. If we find that there's missed information or information that needs to be added that was missed, you can definitely go back and add that and recalculate your pay as often as you need to. So payroll can be calculated based on a pay frequency. You can have more than one pay frequency in your Sage Canadian Payroll. You can have some employees that are paid biweekly and others that are paid monthly. You can also pay employees expenditures through Canadian Payroll monthly, even if you have a biweekly pay. So it's very flexible on when to calculate and how to calculate and who's involved in that calculation. So once you've reviewed your payroll and you're quite happy with it, then you issue either physical paid checks or you issue statements because you are going to do direct deposit, which leads us to the next step, which is uploading your direct deposit to your banking institution. So that is the complete payroll cycle. I don't have any reports after the payroll cycle is completed. I have the reports down here at the bottom, simply because Sage Canadian Payroll can hold many years worth of information. You don't have to print the information at any one of these steps so that you don't lose it. So everything that's recorded and saved and posted in the system can then be later printed or exported out to Excel for further reporting and analysis. It has full government compliances, compliance for T4s, T4As, ROEs, CRA reporting, and even a peer report that you can generate periodically throughout the year to make sure that your CPP and EI are being deducted accurately. Here's an example of a Sage Canadian Payroll workflow. This workflow can be used from new users or existing users where everything that they need to do and use in the system is right here. From editing or adding, modifying an employee record, updating or importing their time cards, calculating the pay. So the workflow is laid out for a user and exactly what they have to do. And down here at the bottom would be reportings or reports that are done on a regular basis for payroll cycle, and then your inquiries. So here's an example of the reporting that's available in Canadian Payroll. Even though this looks like there's only 30 reports, these 30 reports can have probably 50 to 100 views, meaning depending on what you select, different information will appear. So up at the top, we have general employee information. If you want a list of your current employees, if you want to look at employee security, their transactional history. There's also an audit report for transaction audit changes. So if any changes are made within this Canadian payroll that affect pay, an audit is, and you record it, there is an audit history. We have CRA compliance reporting that you can print at any time. You can print it by month, in detail, or in summary. Your record of employment, you could print partial amount or partial areas of your record of employment, but it is ready to upload to Service Canada. Your electronic Reveille 1s, your T4s, and your T4As are available. And then down here at the bottom, we see common reports that are used consistently, which would be accruals, general earnings and hours. We also have hours analysis for those individuals who want to analyze overtime hours, shift hours. That's where we have the analyze the hours. You can analyze tax calculations. And of course, all these reports here query all the history that's in your Canadian payroll. Part of compliance would also be the workman's compensation. So you can have one or more workman's compensation rates, and you can assign it to the employee at the time that you're setting up the employee or when there's a change. So if you've got an organization that has several rates, you have a rate for office workers versus a rate for workers that are on the floor, and then somebody changes their position from one to the other, it's really quick and easy to make that change. So these are just samples of some of the reports that come with Canadian Payroll. Over and above the Canadian Payroll, for those of you who already have Sage 300, you have the capability of using Sage Intelligence for additional reporting and analysis of payroll. So let's take a look. So here's Canadian Payroll. Some of you might recognize this as your Sage 300 platform. There are two ways to actually work within Canadian Payroll. One is to select the module and the system opens up the menu on the right-hand side, or the view that I showed you earlier is what we call a visual flow. And a worker can work 100% from a visual flow. They'd select the flow that they want, and they can run their payroll process from within this flow without having to go into any of these other areas. Any visual flow within Sage can be modified to have external icons and to put in additional information. So for example, if you want to update this workflow to include your logo, and if you want this workflow to include EFT, some general ledger reporting, you can definitely create it so that the user works from this one location. It's very easy when you have a brand new user come in, whether it's for AP, AR, or GL, or in this case, payroll, to sit them in front of the system and say, this is the full cycle of what you need to do. It's a lot easier to navigate within a workflow than it would be to navigate within the module proper, but either way works well. So when you log into Canadian Payroll, we're going to start with our first item. And our first item when we set up payroll or when we go through that payroll cycle is to add, modify our employees. So under the employee area, we would add our employees, and I'm going to go ahead and quickly create an employee. So an employee can be set up with a template. So an option of a template is if you have 6 or 20 or 30 jobs that you hire for, you can actually predefine a job as a template, And then when you hire an employee, you could assign them a template to save some data entry time on the setup of the employee. And an example of a template, let me show you what we have here. So here's an example of two templates that I have. One is called driver, one is called industrial. So if I just click on the driver, I have basic information set up in my template throughout all these items. And the reason behind this is so that when I do set up an employee, it will cut down my time. So let's go back to setting up a brand new employee. I'm going to set up employee number 9, and I'm going to put my name in here. Now I could go and set up my employee without using a template as well. I can go through and fill out any information that's required. If there's something in the system that's required, when I go hit add, the system will prompt saying you cannot, there's an error, you have to complete these other items. But for today, I am going to be using a template. So I'm going to select an existing user or existing employee, or I can select a template. So if I do select a template, it wipes out the information except whatever information I have in that template. So I'm going to put my name. I'm going to use uppercase just so I don't have to worry about this. And I'm going to put in a social insurance number, just enough information for us to bypass this particular screen. And then a birth date. Whoops, I'm not that young. There we go. So I've set up the information, which is just general. Then I have additional information that's required for setting up my payroll. It's going to ask me my position. It's going to ask for if there's an overtime schedule or shift differential. So Sage does have under the setup where we can set up different various overtime rules and shift differential rules and schedules. If you have a registered an RPP plan, you can put your RPP plan in here. You select the workman's compensation that is for this employee and the province of employment. And all this information will ensure that when the employee's pay is calculated, that the correct deductions are removed from their pay. We can use what's called cost center overrides, and that's designed if you have units, divisions, locations, and you want to share costs, employee costs amongst those units, divisions, or departments, you can definitely do so using Sage 300. And the different types of costs that get shared out would be anything that's an expense to the employer, so CVP, EI, if you have, of course, earnings. So those are the types of costs that would be shared out between one or many departments or GL account codes. So because I selected a template, all this information came across, my pay frequencies and all the earning and deduction codes that apply to this employee. Because it was a template, that does not mean that I cannot change this. I can make additional changes. I can delete information and I can add information. I'm going to give myself a real good hourly rate here. The taxes, again, set as a template, all the taxes came across, including the default TD1s. So I could have all this predefined. If not, I'd say it takes about 2 to 3 minutes to set up an employee from beginning to end. If I use a template, it could take me less than a minute. I have other information if I want to track an alternate address or emergency contact. And I have optional fields. And optional fields you may or may not be aware of are fields that you can have throughout Sage, not just in payroll, where if you have a need to track information and Sage does not have a field for it, you can actually create a field. And a field can be a date, a dollar value, a text field, or an answer of a yes or no. So once your employee is set up, you're ready to run a pay. So the next step would be to add or modify or import your time card. So that under the transaction area, we're going to create a time card for our new staff member. Here are some existing time cards. I can copy an existing time card. I can import my time cards, or I can create a new one. I can select my employee, my time card number, whether it's a reusable time card, one that's going to be used every 2 weeks or every frequency, or if this is a one-off that once the pay is done, it will get removed. The choice is yours, and you can have a combination of both. You can have a reusable time card for some deductions, and then the pay could be a time card. You can also have time cards where you can separate them so that you want the vacation pay paid separately from the regular pay, if that is something that you need to have. As you record your earnings and deductions below, it would show you all the earnings that are available for this employee. You do not have to populate all these fields. You populate the fields that you would use. So 40 hours. Add. So my time card is completed. Down here at the bottom, I have 40 hours. So once my time cards are in the system, the next step is to calculate payroll. Calculating payroll would ask you for some date information up at the top, the date of when the check is going to be posted, and then the different frequencies for which you are paying. So the different frequencies, as I mentioned before, you can have an organization that has more than one frequency, or you can have a standard frequency, but also run an extra pay to pay employee expenditures out, whether it's for lodgings, whether it's for kilometers that you're paying out, or any meals or entertainment. You can put it in the system and it will not be taxed and it will not be included in any taxable reports. You can also run the pay or calculate the pay for one individual or for a group of individuals using a list. Right now I have this set up to generate EFT, but if I wanted to print out a bonus and I wanted to do physical checks as opposed to doing a direct deposit, I can uncheck that. And these will, the checks that get created will go to, will be printed as checks as opposed to be ready to be uploaded to the bank as a direct deposit. So I'm just going to go ahead and process. If you run into any problems or if there's any errors or any warnings, once the system goes through and runs the calculate pay, it will provide a report with a payroll exception. And this exception are warnings. Once you open the report, it will tell you the information that, or the reason why the report was created. It could be just a warning for information purposes only, or it could be that it will affect your pay. So common practice would be to have a look at it, read it. Now, one of the things that Sage does look at and will monitor are when items such as accruals have been exceeded, or whether they have been, the frequency was not calculated, or if they have gone over and above. So good information to have. The next step would be to either print our payroll checks or our advices. Advices can be emailed. So very simple. Those of you on the call who have done accounts payable inside of Sage, the process is going to be very similar when you get through to the next screen. You can have more than one bank. So you can have, if you have more than one, let's say, reporting ID with CRA, you have two EI rates, for example. You can have 2 EI rates or 3 up to 5 in the system. You can also have multiple banks. So if you have one group of employees being using bank 1 and another group of employees coming out of bank 2, you can definitely change what bank you're going to use. You have the option of printing full detail on the pay stub, or to summarize the pay stub by the type of pay and the type of and the rate. You also have the option to print a message so that when the employees receive their pay stub, there is a message on the bottom. And of course, how they are printed. They can be printed by first name, last name. You can also print them by a classification. And a classification is a way to group employees by type or group employees by location or job. And that is assigned when you first set up the employee. So here's my list of my checks. I can specify if I'm going to print physical checks or or if I'm going to actually issue EFT, and I can do them both at the same time. So the preview screen, which I didn't show you, but I'll go back and show you, will allow you to first print your physical checks. So if you have an employee who hasn't provided you with their EFT information yet, that's not a problem. You can print a check and then generate your EFT advices. I'm just going to print these to screen. You have several out-of-the-box options that come with Sage 300. If these options don't meet your needs, we can definitely modify them. We can put your logo, we can make some additional changes to the form. But out of the box, there's 5 that you can choose from. Because I am going to print preview first, this is an example of a pay stub. It's not very appealing, but I'll show you a nicer one. So once the pay is done, if you've made a mistake, you can cancel your pay and redo it, or you can accept it by saying yes. So once you accept your pay, it's at this point that the pay will be posted to the general ledger, or it will be captured in the general ledger bucket so that you can once a month generate my payroll entry, and it will send that information to Canadian Payroll. So I'm going to go ahead and say no at this point because I want to show you something else. Oh yeah, let's go ahead. So now it's posting. So at this point is where an employee would receive an email. For those employees that are receiving email, so when we set up our employee, there's an area in the employee setup where we can identify an email address. And if there's an email address, those employees will get emailed. If there is no employee email address, that would go to your printer. So here's an example of a document. You control what the name of the email is going to say. So in this case, I called it accounting document. It's a PDF. You can put in what the script of what the user is going to see as the body of the email. You can have a lot more information. I just created one really quick to show you. The email, the PDF itself can be named, or it can have the pay period end date. And in my sample here, I do not have a password assigned to this statement, but you can have a password assigned so that the user not only can receive it by email, but they would have to have a password in order to open it. And that is just simply to prevent a user who might be sharing an email with a partner so that only the person, the recipient that should see it will be able to see it. So that is an option. So here's an example of Eva Green. Up here at the top, you can have a logo, you can have statement of earnings, you can have anything you'd like on this. Out of the box, we'll take what the system offers, and then you can customize this to look any way that you want. So it has information up at the top: pay period, start dates, end date, the deposit date, the name of the employee, and then the bottom component or the bottom area is all the information of the pay that this employee is going to receive this pay. And when I printed this, I selected detail. Had I selected summarize, I wouldn't have 10 days worth of our regular hours here. It would just show me one line with a accumulated of 71 hours and the total dollars. Posting complete. Other things that you can do with payroll, because one of the things is flexibility. Very important to have in-house payroll is a flexibility to run a pay when you need to run a pay. So over here to the left, you have additional information of running a manual check. So if you want to run a manual check, you can run the manual check, you can process it, or for whatever reason, if you've already paid your employee through accounts payable and now you want to record it in the system, we can do that as well using a combination of manual check and post the manual check. The AFT is after the fact. Generating your EFT is a very simple process. This is the process that will actually take your EFT take the information that you posted and put it in a format for your bank. It supports all Canadian institutions. If there are two EFT options available to you, one is the one that you see on the screen, which is geared for Canadian banks. But if you have banks that are outside of Canada, then we have another option for you, which is the Orchid EFT, which has every bank around most like world banks. And if there is one that's missing, then Orchid will create one for you. So when you generate your EFT file, you have an option to have the original file, a replacement, so if there is a change, and you can also do a test when you first set up the EFT. So once your payroll is completed, your pay stubs have been issued or printed, it's been sent to the general ledger. The next step usually is that you would print off your reporting documents. So in a reporting document would be the CRA, how much you owe CRA for that period. So the CRA report can be printed in summary or in detail. It can be printed for within a pay period, by employee, or a selection list, which is a grouping of employees. So I am actually going to run this for the first year, or the first half of the year. So I'm going to say from January to June. This report will list what you owe CRA. So here's an example. I'm just going to increase the size of this in case it's small on the screen. Oh, now it's too big. Here we go. So here's an example of our report, just a fictitious number up here. So all our taxes are federal. If you have Quebec, then it does break out the Quebec taxes, and it will identify what is subject to tax versus what isn't. If you have registered pension plans or RRSPs, you want to make sure that you tax correctly. So that would be our total remittance for this reporting period. In Canadian Payroll or anywhere in Sage 300, I can actually take this document, I can go File, and I can export. And I can export the file to, let's say, Excel, to the application. And it opens up the information that I need. And you can do this any Sage 300 payroll or any Sage 300 report. You can print to the screen, and then from there you can print in data only. If you select something other than data only, it would put in all the report formatting, which makes it more difficult to manage, to modify. Record of employment. The record of employment, because you have all the information already set up under the employee setup and all the pay has gone through, the information is captured here. There are some things that you would have to update, and anything with an asterisk, up here it says asterisks indicate required fields. So as you load your employee into the system, and right now I have an employee loaded in here by the name of Grace Jones, I'm going to change that to a different employee. Load that employee in. Now I am loading one employee in, but if I'm doing mass ROEs, I have 50 employees, 100 employees. By the way, the max is 100 employees at a time, and it's not a Sage limitation, it's actually Service Canada limitation. So if you do load more than one employee, you would navigate them between them using this other area here. So if I were to actually, let me just do that, I'll show you. I'm going to load 2 employees. Based on numerical order, I have Eva Green first, but then the next person on my list is Grace Jones. So I could go through each employee, update the information that's required, and from that grouping, I can then click on the web ROE in order to create a file. When I click on the web ROE, it gives me an option of a draft or a submit. So a draft would be when I save it to my computer, I log on to the agency and I upload this, it will actually not submit it. It's just in a draft mode. So what the draft mode would mean is that I have the capability to add, modify it. Sorry, I got things open here that I shouldn't have. Let's go back here. So a draft mode will allow you to upload the ROE and still make changes. And then once those changes are done, you would submit it at the Service Canada. And whereas the submit will allow you, when you upload it, it submits it fully and will generate it. You can also do an amended ROE. So amended ROE would be something that you would do on the HRDC. T4s, they're all predefined, so you don't have to have predefined pay, or you don't have to have paper. It's predefined, ready to go. The T4s can be printed at any time. So for example, in this database here, I might have 6 years worth of information. I can go back and print T4s for 6 years. As long as the information's in the system, I can reprint them. This is also where I would print my CPP, QPP, and EI balancing report. I would select my frequency, whether it's a biweekly, how many cycles, and this would give me a report that would identify whether we are in line with our reporting deductions for CPP and EI. So once your T4s are completed, you would select your electronic. It puts them into the electronic file for you to upload to HRDC. So a little bit about the setup of Canadian Payroll, what that setup looks like. So under Canadian Payroll setup, we are going to look at the types of earnings and deductions that you can have in the system. So the types of earnings and deductions that you can set up accruals, earnings, you can have advances and advance repayments, deductions, expense reimbursements, and benefits. Depending on what you select here, you would have other criteria and other information that you would select. Sage has done a little bit of the work for you and some of the guessing based on what type of code that you set up when it comes to T4 reporting or Revel 1 reporting. All the information of the different T4 boxes are available, and twice a year when CRA releases tax tables, Sage will update the tax tables accordingly by jurisdiction, province, federal, provincial. They also update the ROEs. So any information that's released from CRA or Service Canada, Sage will update as well. The biggest questions I get when I set up Canadian Payroll for an individual is benefits. Whether they are cash benefits, non-cash benefits, what's the difference between them? Whether the benefit is employer, and do we post that benefit, or are we just using that benefit to track? And the different types of calc methods that we have. So it is a very robust application. Sage Canadian Payroll used to be in the DOS form, and then it was converted to the Windows form, and it keeps on going. I'm going to bring up code here. Regular hours. So here's the simple code. I'm going to be making a modification. It pops up saying you have somebody who's been assigned this code in a time card. Any changes you may hear may affect the time card. So it's just a warning. If you have different departments or different locations or a different way of tracking employee costs, this is how you do it. So this is an example of a standard earning code. If I look at the beginning, it's an hours code. It's biweekly. We want to print it on the pay, and it is subject to workman's compensation. All the taxes that are applicable. So if you have a company that has across Canada, multiple locations, multiple jurisdictions, you would list all your taxes in here. They are predefined when we install them. You just select them. But under the GL is where you can actually break down the different type of codes that you can then assign to an employee. So their costs go to their regular location or to where you want them to go. So an example that we see in here, we have our regular expense costs or overtime costs and any shift differential costs and the different departments or GL account codes. So you do not have to have several earnings codes. You just need one earning code as long as the logic is consistent throughout the whole setup, and then just the breakdown of how you want to cost it. And in this sample here, the sample company, we have employee advances set up and the repayment of that advance. So an example of an advance could also be a receivable that an employee has against the company. So they've borrowed some money, whether it was advance or whether it was product, and they're paying back for it. So like garnishes, you can put an amount, and then once that amount is reached, the system will stop. We have expense reimbursements that don't affect any type of government reporting, ROE reporting whatsoever, and can be paid separately or could be paid together. Pensions, and anyone who's on the call who does pensions, an RPP plan, they know that yearly they might have pension adjustments, which we could also do in the Sage 300. We can adjust the payroll. And of course, the accruals. So accruals are flexible. So let me bring up an accrual type here. So if I bring up an accrual type, you have 3 types of accruals that the system will capture. So would be vacation, sick, or bank time. For example, any lieu time you could bank in here. Once you select your accrual, you then have the different employee calc methods. So calc methods could be a percentage, so 4, 6, 8%, depending on length of service. It could be hours for hours worked or hours for frequency. When you set up any one of these codes, you can, if you're setting up something at 4% or 6% or 8% and their hourly rate changes and now you're paying it out, you would link it to their regular earning hours so that you're always paying what they earn as of today, not what they have accrued over the past year, which could be at a different rate. So once you have your accrual, in this particular case, we said it's percentage. You could say, okay, for the first 3 years, we are not giving anybody vacation to start. They have to, there's increments, this could be 4%. And then after 3 years, but before 10 years, it could be 6%. And the system uses the hire date to actually calculate what the service through year is. So how the accruals work for this particular setup is once the accrual is calculated, it gets recorded as an expense and the other side of the entry goes to a liability account. When the accrual is taken by the employee, it reduces the liability account and it affects your bank. You can also have employer-based deductions, for example, medical deductions. So it's, as you can see, it's pretty basic payroll. It does what it's supposed to do. It's very rare that I come across a customer where the Canadian payroll does not fit. It has an area there for common deductions. So the common deductions are if you have an employee with multiple garnishees and the garnishees cannot go below a certain limit, that's where you can set up all the deductions that the employee has and then the different limitations that you can put on them. Your workman's compensation codes and the different rates, your overtime schedules. So you can have various overtime schedules. Here's an example overtime pay. Anything over 8 hours worked in one day, it's 1.5. When the overtime schedule is created, it is assigned to the employee under the employee profile. A common thing that we have with employees as well is employees will call to ask questions regarding their pay. There are 2 ways of doing that. One is you look at their pay stub and because that's what they're looking at. The other option is you can come under employee activity. And at your fingertips on the first screen, you can see the year to date based on the month I'm logged in and the year I'm logged in. I can change this or this at any time. The top portion is based on dollars and cents, regular hours, or sorry, regular pay, overtime pay. It's based on month, quarter, and year. The bottom portion is to do with hours. So sick hours, vacation hours, hours worked, banked hours. But under the check area is where you have all the checks that were issued to this employee for as long as the employee has been with you. So the system automatically brings you into this current year and the current period, but you can change this back to prior years. And you can also identify whether you want to look at history, anything that was reversed, manual checks, whether you want to look at checks that are posted or not posted but in progress. You would select the check that the employee has a question on, hit the open button, and it actually opens up all the activity that happened for this one particular pay. I'm going to increase the size of the screen a little bit. So this is all the activity that has happened for this employee. It's broken down into 4 areas or 5 areas. It's broken down by earnings and deductions, the taxes, the employer, so any employer-based charges, which would be taxes and any common deductions that the employer has or benefits that the employer is given would be showed here. You can track optional fields, so if there's additional information that you want to appear here to help you answer any employee questions, we can definitely have that done. And then of course, if there is any EFT with bank. From here, we can actually go file and print this report, print additional information. So I'm going to show you a common report. This is the payroll register for this one employee for this one pay period, so that you can see all the payroll information that's available. So here's an example of the payroll information. I'm going to increase the size of the screen a little bit. So the top half is just general information about the employee, the date, the pay period, from and to date, the amount of the check deposit, and whether there was EFT or not. In this case, this employee was not. But below is all the information on everything that happened for this pay. Not only the earnings, the deductions, the costs, the accruals, the employer portion, the EI information that's going to be captured for the ROE, but it also shows you the general ledger accounts that are affected, whether they are the expense accounts that are affected or whether they are the liability accounts that are affected, and how the information was calculated. So for example, we have vacation here. It looks like it's 4% of vacation. Well, how did the system arrive at that $62? It shows you exactly how it arrived at it. It took all the earnings for regular, multiplied it by 4%, and that's how it came to that amount. This is also how you can see what's being taxed. So if you do have some benefits, this is how, when you set up the benefits, you verify that they're set up correctly, that you can make sure that you're taxing the correct amount on a benefit, or around any companies that have RSPs or pension plans, not to deduct from income tax or to lower income tax, or it's subject to CPP but not EI. This is where you can find that information. Down at the bottom, we have the employee portions. We have the breakdown of all the workman's compensation, so that when we print out our report, it will tell us exactly what that total value is. And also for EI. So if I were to go under my ROE for this employee, I will see this entry in that employee's profile on the ROE. If for whatever reason this employee did not have a pay, the system would capture the pay period end date and would put in 0 for earnings and 0 for hours. So this payroll register can be printed at any time. So that's really the full cycle of running Canadian payroll inside of Sage 300. I'm just going to go back to the process flow so that you can see how simple and how easy it can be. Okay. Does anybody have any questions?
So I do have a few questions here, and if anyone has any additional questions, just enter them into the chat. The first question I have is, how do I get the payroll tax updates? Does BAASS help with that?
Absolutely. So there's a few options. One is Sage would let you know when they are released. So you'll receive an email from them with instructions on how to download and implement the tax tables yourself. Or we can, you call us and you schedule your tax table and we will implement it for you.
The next question I have is, how many years of history does Sage keep?
Good question. So Sage can keep up to 99 years worth of history. Most people like to keep anywhere from 7 to 10 years worth of history.
The next question I have is, can I email my T4s?
Yes, you can. So you can email your T4s like you can your pay stubs. With T4s, we highly, highly recommend that you put a password on your T4s, but you can, yes, the answer to that question is yes.
Can my T4 slip be adjusted?
The actual copy of the T4, it's regulated by CRA. However, if you have an amount that needs to be fixed, then yes, you can adjust your T4. So under the payroll employees area, there is the user transactions. Any updates that you do here will affect ROEs, will affect the T4s, and will affect year-to-date history. So yes, you can.
And the last question I have here is, does BAASS offer payroll services?
Yes, actually we do. We have 3 types of payroll services. The first type is where we do the payroll for you. So bumper to bumper, we set up your employees, we run through the full payroll cycle and send you the information to distribute to your employees. That's our first offering. And then our second would be if you have in-house payroll and your payroll person is unavailable, they are on some type of extended leave, then we can take over in that temporary space of 1 month, 2 months, 6 months to run your payroll. And then our other offering is that we will be your payroll resource, so that if you have a question about a certain earning or deduction type or benefit type, whether it's taxable or not, based on the jurisdiction, the province that, or provinces that you operate, we can provide you with that guidance and assistance.
Okay, so we just had another question come in.
Okay.
Could we do payroll under different CRA employer numbers?
Yes. Yes, you can, to a maximum of 5.
Okay. So with that being all of the questions today, I'd like to thank everyone for taking time out of their busy days to attend, as well as you, Anna, for presenting today. Everyone who is registered will also be receiving a recording of the webinar once it is available via email, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day.
Thank you. Have a great day, everybody.